One of the less obvious consequences of the Korean War was how the lack of reliable field infrastructure amplified simple problems into life-or-death challenges. Military planners assumed that issued equipment, portable stoves, fuel and cooking kits, would reliably allow troops to prepare hot meals and drinks. In practice, supply disruptions, extreme terrain and shifting front lines often rendered these tools unavailable. Soldiers had to improvise solutions for basic needs, such as boiling water, or risk dehydration, illness, and decreased operational effectiveness. What Korea revealed, and what World War II had already demonstrated, is that small, portable methods for heating water could significantly improve survival, comfort, and endurance in harsh conditions. If you're interested in history that explores practical survival innovations alongside broader military lessons, subscribe to Backyard Wisdom. This channel focuses on techniques that were proven in wartime, often improvised from ordinary materials, and that remain surprisingly relevant today. One of the most remarkable and honestly often overlooked methods from World War II was a simple trick that allowed soldiers to heat water anywhere, without a conventional stove, fuel supply, or, any elaborate setup. The first insight here is that heating water was absolutely essential for both survival and operational readiness. World War II veterans often emphasized that hot water was not merely a comfort. It allowed soldiers to sterilize drinking water, prepare rations, and maintain hygiene, which in turn really reduced the incidence of gastrointestinal illness and frostbite in cold climates. In Korea, when standard stoves were unavailable, troops faced dehydration, weakened immunity, and fatigue. Soldiers who had learned improvised techniques from World War II were able to sustain themselves even under extreme supply constraints. This underscores a broader principle. Basic necessities such as water can become critical survival elements when conventional logistics fail. The second insight is that, metal containers made all the difference. The World War II trick really relied on using any available metal container, whether it was ration tins, cans, or even empty fuel canisters, as a vessel for water. Metal conducts heat efficiently and, tolerates direct contact with small, controlled heat sources. Soldiers discovered that even the smallest container could boil enough water for a cup of tea, instant coffee, or sterilization. The simplicity of this approach meant that troops could carry containers in their packs and use them whenever conditions required without dependence on larger stoves. Korean War veterans who applied the same principle demonstrated that portability and versatility are more valuable than bulk or sophistication in improvised survival tools. The third insight is that controlled fires could be built virtually anywhere. One of the most remarkable aspects of the World War II technique was, honestly, its adaptability to minimal fuel sources. This adaptability allowed for innovative strategies that changed the course of the war. Soldiers learned to use small scraps of wood, charcoal, paper, or even, combustible refuse to create concentrated, controlled flames. By placing the metal container directly over these small fires, they could bring water to a boil without exposing themselves to the risks of building larger fires. In Korea, this method proved invaluable for soldiers operating in forests, mountains, or urban ruins, where visibility and fire control were really absolutely critical. The principle endures. Strategic minimal energy application is, safer and more efficient than trying to replicate full-scale cooking methods in field conditions. The fourth insight is that insulation preserves heat and, reduces fuel consumption. World War II soldiers discovered that wrapping containers in cloth, layering with soil, or embedding them partially in the ground actually retained heat and, honestly, accelerated the boiling process. These improvisations reduced the amount of fuel required and allowed soldiers to maintain warmth over longer periods. In Korean winter operations, units employing these techniques wasted less energy and could prepare water more reliably, even in sub-zero temperatures. This emphasizes a broader survival lesson. Understanding the physics of heat transfer and insulation can transform limited resources into effective solutions. The fifth insight is that the water heating method doubled as a sterilization strategy. Boiling water in improvised containers was not solely about warmth or cooking. It also neutralized bacterial contamination, reducing the risk of waterborne illness in frontline conditions where clean water was scarce. In World War II, soldiers in field hospitals or remote outposts routinely used this method to sterilize equipment, medical tools, and drinking water, and Korean War units who adopted the practice significantly lowered rates of gastrointestinal disease. The lesson, extends beyond historical context. Basic chemical and thermal principles remain critical in emergency survival. The sixth insight is that adaptability was really the key to reliability. The genius of this World War II trick was its flexibility. Soldiers could use any heat source, container, or insulating material available, modifying the setup to suit environmental constraints. Success, did not depend on a standardized stove, a fuel ration, or even a manual. During Korea, units that really internalized this principle were able to improvise solutions under some pretty extreme conditions, whether that was in freezing mountains, dense jungles, or even damaged urban environments. Survival, in the end, was determined by the ability to observe, adapt, and repurpose resources, not by rigidly following issued equipment protocols. The seventh insight is that small, repeated advantages compound over time. Heating water using this simple method might seem minor compared to strategic objectives, but the cumulative effect was significant. Soldiers who could reliably prepare warm water were better hydrated, maintained higher morale, and experienced fewer cold-related injuries. Over extended operations, these small advantages translated into greater endurance and operational efficiency. The Korean War reinforced that minor but consistent survival measures learned and preserved from World War II could have, disproportionate impacts on unit performance and individual resilience. What this trick reveals is that innovation under constraint is honestly timeless. Across both World War II and the Korean War, soldiers were forced to reconcile the gap between doctrine and reality. Tools failed, supplies ran out, and environmental hazards threatened survival at every step. The water heating trick really demonstrates a recurring lesson. Effectiveness depends not on high-tech solutions, but on creativity, resource awareness, and, honestly, disciplined execution. Soldiers who internalized these lessons survived and remained operational, while those who depended solely on issued equipment, they suffered preventable setbacks. Modern survivalists and field operators, they can definitely learn from these historical experiences. The principles behind the World War II water heating method, portability, controlled energy use, insulation, sterilization, and adaptability, they still remain relevant today in emergency preparedness, camping, and disaster response. They show that, understanding simple physical processes and applying them resourcefully often outweighs reliance on elaborate tools. Remembering these techniques matters because they capture the intersection of necessity, ingenuity, and human endurance. The World War II trick to heat water without a stove was not glamorous, but it was life-saving. If you value historical lessons that blend technical insight with practical application, subscribe to Backyard Wisdom, and Share this video with others who appreciate serious, evidence-based exploration of survival strategies. World War II's secret water heating method reminds us that small, improvised innovations often carry the greatest impact, and that understanding and preserving these lessons is just as important today as it was in the mid-20th century.